The events took place in a burning building. A firefighter was carrying a man. The fire had been going on for a long time. The rescuers were running out of energy and they were losing focus. At that moment, the firefighter tripped over the iron on the floor. He dropped the man he was carrying and fell to the ground himself. Then he received a call on his radio. The rescuer was shouting loudly and getting angry. He once went down from the 17th floor to this one, so he couldn't just give up. There was too much distance to cover. Then the fireman pulled himself together and stood up. But at that moment, a wall started to fall on him. The man's whole life ran before his eyes, the debris flying and falling near him. The fireman realized that it was his end. Meanwhile, outside, other firefighters were trying to extinguish the flames. None of them wanted to go inside because it was too dangerous. One of the men grabbed his partner and told him to wait for the car to arrive. But he didn't want to hear anything because there were people inside. Their duty was to save everyone who could be saved. A desperate man, Soohyuk, pulled on his helmet and ordered the others to stay put. Meanwhile, the firefighter on whom the wall fell was inside. He regained consciousness, and when he saw himself, he trembled. His legs were crushed by the wall. He could hardly feel them. Then the man took off his mask. He thought it was because of the trail that the search team had to be enlarged. In front of him was another man who had also suffered from the collapse of the wall. He did not show any signs of life. Few people could survive after such a thing. The fireman was shaking and started apologizing to him. He noticed that his oxygen was at 0, so the man would die either from suffocation or from the collapse of another wall, or from the fire that was approaching him with a wall. The man realized that he did not have much time left. Different emotions raged inside him. He worked as a firefighter for 10 years, and during this time he saved many people, but many did not. He wondered if they felt the same way he did. This fear of dying without the possibility of resistance. Before he died, the fireman promised that if he had a chance to save those people again, he would take it. But then he shook his head and changed his mind. The man decided that if he was reborn as a firefighter, he would never be one again. With this thought in mind, he fell asleep. The man slowly began to hear someone calling out for Kim Soohyuk and opened his eyes. He thought the team couldn't have gotten all the way here. Then someone waved his hand. After that, the man was hit in the helmet. He turned to see his offender. He was a guy who was shocked by this behavior. He was hit by an older man who shouted at him to come to his senses, because it was not a training session. The guy addressed him as Santa Hyun and rubbed the back of his head. He didn't understand what was happening and how he ended up here. He thought that he had been pinned down by the ceiling. Suddenly, he realized that Santa Hyun had died 9 years ago. The man was yelling at him because he couldn't hear him. Kim Soohyuk shouted that he heard him because he didn't want to get hit in the head again. The boy realized that his body was working on reflexes. Santa Hyun ordered the boy to follow him because they had no time. Kim Soohyuk thought that he was already familiar with all this. It was reported on the radio that 5 people had been rescued from the department store, and the operators hoped to quickly complete the operation. At that moment, Kim Soohyuk remembered everything. That was the case. It was his first mission 10 years ago, when he extinguished a fire in a large shopping center. The incident was so big that all the nearest units were sent there, and fortunately, most people were evacuated then. But 2 children on the 7th floor could not be saved. The tragedy was strong and difficult, because it was the first surgery and the first failure. Kim Soohyuk came to say goodbye to his children and was shaking. He thought that even if it was a dream, it was a good thing, because he would put his best foot forward and try to save the children. Santa Hyun turned to his partner and asked if he was okay. The man said that Kim Soohyuk was in such shock that he lost his soul and ordered us to gather and follow him. He would smash the door with an axe and say that their task was to find other people on the 7th floor. Therefore, if Kim Soohyuk saw something, he had to report it immediately. One last blow and the man smashed the door. Then he kicked them out. Santa Hyun said he had gone inside. Then they went up the stairs, and the man once again ordered me to stay close to him. Kim Soohyuk thought that if it was a dream, then why was it so hard for him, as if his body did not belong to him? But even in such circumstances, he had to give up. The children would be saved. Suddenly, some kind of digital message flew up to him from above. Kim Soohyuk did not understand what was happening and what he was dreaming. The message said to save all the people and the number of victims on the 7th floor, as well as the reward for doing so and the rank. The guy's eyes went to his forehead. Everything seemed so strange and unreal. After that, a new message showed a fire axe and a description of it. Kim Soohyuk's surprise was interrupted by his partner, Santa Hyun, who asked why the guy was hanging around. The man told him to come in to look around. Kim Soohyuk set himself the task of finding children quickly in such a large space. It had happened almost 10 years ago and he didn't remember anything. But he guessed that they must have hid in a place that was not so easy to find. He calmed himself down because he was no longer the young Kim Soohyuk he had been 10 years earlier. Santa-hyun was a veteran, but even he couldn't save the children. And this time he had to trust his feelings. Kim Soohyuk took all his strength and quickly ran somewhere. His partner was shocked by this behavior. He shouted at the guy's back and was indignant. And then he caught up with Kim Soohyuk and scolded him because he hadn't been taught this in fire school. Santa-hyun yelled at him and scolded him, but the boy just put his shoulder on his arm. Kim Soohyuk said that he knew what the man's opinion of him was. After that, he grabbed Santa-hyun with both hands and asked her to trust him. All the man said was that Kim Soohyuk was still very young. He didn't have time to finish because the guy immediately ran on. Santa-hyun was in a stupor because he didn't understand why the boy had started calling him Hyun. Kim Soohyuk kept running. Things were heating up, things were bad. Everything was in smoke, and my strength was also failing. He thought it was a dream, but it felt like reality. Kim Soohyuk ran like lightning and looked around every corner, but the children were nowhere to be found. Suddenly, the guy noticed something. There was a small sneaker on the floor. It was definitely a children's room, so the children were somewhere nearby. Kim Soohyuk called out to his partner. The man ran to him, and the guy said that someone was supposed to be here. Santa-hyun couldn't believe him so easily, so the boy pointed to the child's shoes as proof. Then Kim Soohyuk simply moved the table because he realized that the man was not dry. After that, the guy opened the nightstand in his desk. There were 2 children inside. Kim Soohyuk was incredibly happy to see them alive. He quickly reported his discovery on the radio. The children were breathing but unconscious. Santa-hyun was simply shocked by the professional work of the newcomer. He could not believe that a guy who came on his first mission could behave like that. The man thought that Kim Soohyuk would be punished for her disobedience. But if it weren't for him, the rescuers would most likely not have had time to save the children. Santa-hyun wondered who this guy was. Then Kim Soohyuk called his partner and he came to reality. The boy handed the girl over and said he would take another child and go downstairs with him. The man simply agreed and carried out the order. The words of this newcomer sounded very confident. Santa-hyun ordered them to leave the fire scene and they went downstairs with the children. The staircase was in smoke. The fire was spreading very strongly. Kim Soohyuk was carrying a child and trying to see everything. He thought about the fact that his legs were not holding him and he was suffocating. He fell to his knees, telling himself that it was only a short walk to the first floor and that they would help him there. But my legs did not obey. They had no power. Kim Soohyuk tried to support himself and said that there was only a little bit left. He had to hold on for a while. Then Santa-hyun approached him. He extended his hand to the boy. The man helped him and said that he was good at pretending to be skilled. And Kim Soohyuk stood up. Santa-hyun supported the boy and told him not to give up, because the lives of these children now depended on him. These words motivated Kim Soohyuk and gave her strength. The rescuer was almost at the finish line. With only a few meters to go, the men sped up. Here is the expected output. Kim Soohyuk opened the door. It was getting light outside, and doctors ran up to the couple to help the children. Other firefighters extinguished what was left of the shopping center. Kim Soohyuk was lying on the floor and rejoicing that this time he had managed to save the lives of these children. Santa-hyun looked at his partner, who looked so happy. This brought a smile to his face as well. Then, numbers started appearing over his head again. The message said that the quest had been successfully completed. Kim Soohyuk laughed when he saw it. He thought it was crazy, but he was overwhelmed with joy. Rescuers were hovering around him, but he didn't notice them. The messages told us about the outcome of the quest. And then he told me about the fire helmet and its characteristics, as if in a game. Meanwhile, the events moved to a residential building. Kim Soohyuk was lying on his bed, just opening his eyes after a hard day at work. He did not fully realize what had happened, but he already had a strange feeling. He looked around the room and realized that it was morning. Soohyuk just jumped out of his seat and screamed. The guy was in the same small apartment as 10 years ago. After that, Kim Soohyuk looked at his reflection and screamed. He realized that yesterday was not a dream and that he had really been reborn into his younger self. The guy sat on the edge of the bed and wondered if he had really been reborn or if the last 10 years had been just a pleasure. He was not sure of this. What was clear was that Kim Soohyuk was alive, and before that he had memories of the future. Kim Soohyuk fell on his bed and decided that the first thing he would do was quit his job as a firefighter. He could not believe that he would have this horrible life again. The guy stretched loudly and calmed down, because he was only 26 and his life was just beginning. He pulled himself together and clearly promised to start a new life. Because from that moment on, he was Kim Soohyuk. Suddenly, the digital message appeared in front of him again. He had already forgotten about it. Kim Soohyuk now wanted to find out what that annoying thing was because it wasn't a dream. He recalled yesterday when this message surfaced after the rescue of the children. It would come in small parts, and then a message would appear. Then it said that the quest was over. Which quest was it? And then there was the award and promotion to the 5th level, and the rank of firefighter beginner. The guy still thought that it was very strange, even for a dream. He also received a reduction in the likelihood of being harmed by fire. Kim Soohyuk raised his hand over his eyes to see how his body had changed, because he felt less tired inside. This implied that the higher the level, the stronger the guy was and the more skills he had. Kim Soohyuk jumped out of bed, because he had already decided that he was quitting, and he had to think about how to organize his life. But first, he had one task. The guy had to remember the numbers of lottery tickets. The events moved to a noisy street. Kim Soohyuk held the papers in his hands and realized that he knew nothing about investments and stocks. He had been living his life immersed in work all his life. But in any case, Kim Soohyuk had no money for lottery tickets or stocks. And then he thought about which professions were the most promising in the future, and it would be nice to get some certificates. Kim Soohyuk noticed a couple walking to a meeting. He was jealous of their ordinary life. The guy suddenly blushed because he decided that he would definitely have a relationship in this life. Suddenly, Kim Soohyuk felt sick in the middle of the street. The danger sense skill was activated. He felt something strange in his ears. All the other passers-by looked at the guy as if he were crazy. Then, a loud explosion occurred on the upper floors of the building next door. The explosion was very powerful and immediately caused a large amount of smoke. People started to panic and run away. Kim Soohyuk realized that it was a gas explosion, and only it could have caused such a large-scale explosion. A woman pointed up and said that everyone should look. But there was a person who went out the window to be noticed. A man threw half of his body out of the window. He had no room to breathe. Kim Soohyuk analyzed that if the man fell from such a height, he would have no chance, and there was no time to wait for rescuers. The guy told the girl to call the emergency service. Kim Soohyuk ran and took off his clothes on the way, cursing that he hadn't been on shift today. A red message appeared in front of him again, telling him to choose between a quest, the path of glory and the path of suffering. The story went on to say that Kim Soohyuk had traveled through time and ended up in the past. He could achieve everything with his memories and experience. He panicked, wondering if he would have to go through it all again. He had 2 quests to choose from. The path of glory was about ignoring those in need and preparing for a brighter future. And on the way of suffering, I had to save a person in need. The next message said that Kim Soohyuk could have chosen his path, but the choice could not be changed. The guy thought it was a joke. For him, the choice was obvious. There was nothing to think about. If he pretends now that he didn't see anything, he will be able to live the normal life he wanted. Kim Soohyuk looked at the man hanging from the window. After that, the guy ran away. He did not understand what choice he could have made if a person was dying right in front of his eyes. Kim Soohyuk ignored the message and just ran to the man who needed help. But the game decided for him and chose the path of suffering. And then, they said that they praised the boy and his balanced decision and hoped that his path would be full of blessings. Kim Soohyuk ran inside the building and ordered everyone to evacuate. The guy ran upstairs with all his might, passing people. He was angry, but he didn't understand who or what he was angry at. Kim Soohyuk recalled that choice between 2 paths. He imagined himself in a cool car with an expensive watch and flowers, waiting for a girl. And then I remembered how I cried at the funeral of my children. Then he imagined his successful life with the girl again. And then he remembered the happy children he had saved, and the love he never had, but could have had by choosing success. Then the guy remembered the man hanging from the window of his burning apartment. The last fantasy was the love that Kim Soohyuk wanted so badly. All people need someone to love them. The guy came back to reality and loudly shook his head. He could barely climb the floors and realized that this path was definitely suffering. Meanwhile, the smoke began to descend. Even though he was only 26, it was still very difficult. He felt stupid and crazy. Then he noticed a water hose. He took it and thought that he had definitely lost his mind. After all, this choice definitely spoke of success, of the life he dreamed of. Kim Soohyuk turned on the water and soaked the rag. After that, he tied it around his mouth and nose to avoid breathing the smoke and regretted his choice once again. And then he took the hose and turned it up to the maximum. The force of the water was very strong, it should have helped. The guy began to twist even harder because he realized that he could take it. He suddenly wondered if it was a level increase because his physical properties had really improved. Kim Soohyuk was pleased with himself because in this way he could separate the smoke and climb upstairs. He had to hold out for a little while longer. Here the guy was going upstairs. The door of one of the apartments was open. He continued to extinguish the smoke with water. Suddenly, he noticed an open door. Now it became clear why there was so much smoke because the opposite door was open. Fire was already bursting out of the closed door like a wild animal. It just looked like hell. He realized that it didn't matter how much his abilities had improved, because a person was worthless in front of fire. If there is another gas explosion, it will all be over. Therefore, Kim Soohyuk decided to act faster. Suddenly, he had that strange feeling again. Something bad must have happened. The guy slowed down because he expected danger. There was a lot of fire in front of him, coming at the guy in a wall. He fell to the floor, terrified. Although the skill worked, the thought of what could have happened was frightening. The guy realized that if it wasn't for his skill, he would have been set on fire. Kim Soohyuk recalled that feeling before the explosion on the street. It saved him every time. Meanwhile, the fire was growing. The guy noticed it, so he had to act immediately. He got up and moved away from the wall of fire to be safer. It was hot and he almost got burned. And then Kim Soohyuk noticed something. It was an injured man hanging from the window. The guy just had to grab him and walk back. Kim Soohyuk took him and asked him how he felt. But the man was unconscious, which complicated the task, so the guy had to think fast. Suddenly, he felt in danger again. Each time Kim Soohyuk reacted faster. Meanwhile, down in the street, many people gathered to watch what was happening. The woman shouted for everyone to look up. 2 men fell from the window where the fire was. It was Kim Soohyuk and a man. He was holding onto something and flying down. People were screaming in fear and did not know what to do. The glass fell to the floor. The man shouted for everyone to look up again. Kim Soohyuk was barely holding onto some cloth that served as a rope. He was hanging in the air, and his feet were against the house. The guy was shaking. It was so hard for him. Everyone looked at them hanging with fear and horror. The crowd could not take their eyes off the spectacle, and there were even more people. Kim Soohyuk was still hanging and holding the man who was only adding weight. In the room, he tried to make the victim regain consciousness, but he felt the danger. Kim Soohyuk realized that there was a gas leak somewhere. He realized the danger it posed to both of them. If this had continued, there would have been another explosion. Kim Soohyuk began to look around the room to come up with something quickly. He ran somewhere because he realized that he had no choice. The guy opened a box with a hose to use it. Time was running out, my strength was diminishing, and there was no turning back. He tied the hose to the wall and went to the window. And then he grabbed the man and ran to hide. Kim Soohyuk accelerated so as not to get scared at the last moment. After that, he simply ran out of the burning room. He was flying and not looking down to avoid getting scared. The plan worked. The last risk was for the guy to stop falling and the hose to stop him. The wall had to hold. It worked, and Kim Soohyuk stopped falling. And then he landed with his feet against the wall to make it a little easier. But his hand, it was shaking as if it was about to break. Kim Soohyuk began to swing. He wanted to break the glass below to get inside. The glass shook but did not break. Kim Soohyuk swung again. The window wouldn't give in to him, and his strength was at 0. Then, the guy gathered all his strength and pushed hard to break the damn glass. He succeeded, and the man just flew inside. He fell to the floor with the victim. Kim Soohyuk was very happy that he succeeded. The guy was laughing loudly and wishing the firefighters would come sooner. Meanwhile, rescuers were rushing to the rescue. They were given details of the danger by radio. But there was a traffic jam on the road. No one could give way. The firemen shouted that they were moving like snails. He opened the window and shouted for the drivers to move their cars off the side lane. They turned on their flashing lights to signal an emergency. Meanwhile, the building was burning even more, with almost all of the upper floors in smoke and fire. The firefighters decided to run on foot because there were no other options. But the crowd that had gathered around the building prevented the rescuers from doing their job. People were shouting and admiring the spectacle, while other firefighters did not understand what was happening. They wanted to understand what had happened, why people were staring at the fire so enthusiastically. Son Tae-hyun yelled at one of his colleagues because he was stalled and had to run quickly to save him. The rescue team went to the building. Meanwhile, Kim Soohyuk and the injured man were on one of the floors. The guy's arm was shaking and spasming. It was definitely injured, but there was no time to think about it. Suddenly, a new message appeared above Kim Soohyuk. It said that the quest had been successfully completed. Kim Soohyuk received new rewards, including a level increase to 6th and a change in rank. But the most interesting was the new skill, life detection. The guy just answered, of course. The message would not go away and was blinding Kim Soohyuk's eyes, so his nerves broke down and he shouted and kicked the game to make it go away. The guy also injured his arm, so it got sore again, making itself felt. Kim Soohyuk was very exhausted, so he yelled at the game again for not allowing his strength to be renewed when he increased his level. But no one ever answered him. The guy calmed down because everything else was fine. He and his husband were in relative safety. Kim Soohyuk smiled at the victim and told him that he was a lucky man. After that, the guy tried to get to his feet. And then I took the man on my shoulder because it was not over yet. There had been 3 explosions so far, so it was too early to talk about security. Kim Soohyuk reached the emergency stairs and thought about how awful and uncomfortable they were. The guy started to descend with small steps because he had no strength at all. He thought that although his physical strength had improved, this time it was definitely the limit. After that, Kim Soohyuk fell back to her feet with her husband, not understanding why it happened every day. Suddenly, he was blinded by the bright light of a lantern. It was a good sign. The firefighters radioed that they had found 2 survivors, and a smile appeared on Kim Soohyuk's face. He realized what the people he was rescuing felt: safety and relief. Meanwhile, the events moved to the fire safety department. A man was sitting at a computer desk, obviously angry and unhappy. Kim Soohyuk stood before him with a very guilty look on his face, cold sweat running down his face. His boss scolded him for not being on duty, for going out on business and accidentally saving a person. It was the captain of the 3rd rescue team, Go Hansen. He asked Kim Soohyuk if he considered himself a hero for doing so, and then the man pointed to a video on the internet and asked if it was him. Kim Soohyuk came closer and leaned over to see. He screamed and was frightened by what he saw. The video showed a fire and an explosion of the building, but he did not see himself from that angle. Then they showed Kim Soohyuk going down the hose and holding another man on top of him. The guy suddenly grabbed the mouse and started scrolling through something, and the captain was shocked by this brazen behavior. Kim Soohyuk wrote comments under the video. They were all very positive and nice. Shame appeared on the guy's face and his cheeks flushed from so many nice words. But Go Hansen quickly brought him to his senses as he was rescued by firefighters from another brigade. After that, the captain hit the guy in the body with a newspaper and shouted that it was all over the news and that he had been scolded by his superiors since the morning. Go Hansen was very nervous, so he adjusted the tie around his neck and complained that he had been burdened with these problems. He looked at Kim Soohyuk and said that in any case, the boy had to take full responsibility. The guy did not expect such a reaction for saving a man. The captain said he would not protect him if there were any problems. Kim Soohyuk waited for the captain to finish scolding him, but thoughts of hitting him and quitting were in his mind. After that, the guy slammed the door loudly and left the office. He left very angry and did not understand how he had worked with such a boss for 10 years. Another firefighter called him in the corridor. It was Sante-hyun, and the man asked how Kim Soohyuk was feeling. The guy scratched his head and looked down, saying that everything was fine. And then he raised his hand, saying that there were only small burns and wounds and a dislocated left shoulder, but it was not serious. The man's face showed a look of surprise and shock. After all, when he saw Kim Soohyuk after the rescue, he definitely noticed that there was not a living thing on the guy's body. Doctors called for Kim Soohyuk, but he lost consciousness and did not respond. And now the guy was demonstrating how to move his dislocated shoulder, saying that it was all his young body. But the man did not understand where this monster came from. Kim Soohyuk said that it might have seemed impossible, but he slept through it, woke up, but didn't have time to finish. Sante-hyun grabbed his arm to check him, and he screamed. The man asked him why he continued to behave like that. Sante-hyun exploded and asked if Kim Soohyuk really thought he would be praised for ignoring all the rules, even if he had saved a man. Kim Soohyuk looked at his throbbing hand and asked if the man had watched the video, saying that everything ended well. Sante-hyun also started to tell him off, saying that everything miraculously ended well, and that he would never have done that in his life. He changed his tone to a calmer one and asked if there was any other way. Kim Soohyuk said that if he hadn't done that, they would have been able to talk only in the afterlife in 10 or 20 years. Santa-hyun did not understand anything I said, and it was written all over his face. He scratched his head and called Kim Soohyuk a walking problem, so he ordered her to walk near him. And then Santa-hyun told me to stop calling him Hyun because he was a great sunbae. He asked if Kim Soohyuk knew how many years they were apart, but the boy understood that, so the man gave up and told him to do as he wanted. Suddenly, fire number 1 was announced over the speakers. The men looked at each other in shock. After that, they both ran as fast as they could to the car. Kang-shik came running out of the shower, not having had time to rinse the shampoo off his head and running away with a wet head. He saw his partners running very fast. The boy could barely keep up with them, not realizing what kind of monsters they were. The men went in and got into the car, but Kim Soohyuk noticed that Kang-shik was missing. At that time, the guy ran into the car, all out of breath. Everyone was there. A third rescue team was sent to help. Santa-hyun was talking on the radio. He was told that there was an accident in the department store in the underground parking lot. The victim has already been brought to the hospital, and the driver is stuck in the broken car. Meanwhile, Kim Soohyuk received a new message. He had to save all the survivors. It was about the details of the accident, and he could not remember this task from his past life. He thought that perhaps everything ended without casualties, because the degree of rescue was also not high. Kim Soohyuk thought that he liked to improve his level, so he wanted to finish everything as soon as possible. A smile appeared on the boy's face. He read about improving his skills and was happy. He was having fun. He clicked on the skill window and was shocked because he hadn't noticed the Detect Life skill when it appeared. Kim Soohyuk recalled the skill of feeling the danger and how it helped him. He realized that if it wasn't for this skill, he would hardly have survived at all. Kim Soohyuk thought he could always quit anyway, but he wondered what would happen if he continued to improve his level. His partner noticed Kim Soohyuk's happy and strange face, holding his beard as if he was thinking. The guy suspected something but decided to keep quiet. He didn't seem to like Kim Soohyuk. Meanwhile, the fire truck was almost there. Rescuers arrived at the scene of the accident and rushed to save the man. They went down to the underground parking lot and immediately found the car stuck in a pillar. Santa-hyun asked the guard about the victim's condition. He seemed to have fainted from shock, stuck in the car, and there was no way to get him out. Then Santa-hyun instructed everyone to prepare a clamp. Kim Soohyuk reacted faster than the others and accepted the command. The guy started the task and thought he was in vain, because the situation was not difficult. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted because someone called Kim Soohyuk. It was Jung Woo-hyun, and he rudely ordered the boy to leave. Kim Soohyuk did not understand what was happening, so he asked again. Then the man simply snatched the hydraulic clamp out of his hands. Jung Woo-hyun yelled at Kim Soohyuk and called her a jerk. He began to tell him off, saying that he didn't need someone who ignored the rules and regulations and did things his own way. Kim Soohyuk's face changed dramatically as he was ordered to leave. He didn't understand why he was being treated this way. Meanwhile, the events moved back 10 years. Back then, Jung-woo and Kim Soohyuk were friends and had a nice conversation. The man advised the boy to take care of his health, as physical fitness was important for a firefighter. Kim Soohyuk accepted the advice with a smile and thanked him for his concern. Jung Woo-hyun asked if he had any difficulties at work, but Soohyuk said that thanks to him, he was able to adapt quickly. The man was very nice and friendly to him 10 years ago. He was like an older brother. Events returned to the present. Kim Soohyuk thought that in his past life, Jung Woo-hyun had never said such things to him. He stood there with his mouth open and watched his partner's work, realizing that he was looking at a completely different person. Meanwhile, firefighters had already started the operation and were preparing to open the doors. Santa-hyun stuck the clamp into the machine and started working. The work was in full swing. Everyone was busy doing their own thing, but working for a common goal. Kim Soohyuk was not exactly upset, but he could not just stand there doing nothing. He tried to approach everyone somehow. Then Jung Woo-hyun just hit him with his hand and hit him in the shoulder. Kim Soohyuk did not understand what was happening at all. The man continued to work as if nothing had happened and it was just an accident. Meanwhile, the case is almost over, as reported by Jung-woo. Santa-hyun ordered to bring a stretcher because the car door opened. 2 firefighters tried to get the man out of the car to prevent further damage to his body. The other 2 ran for the stretcher, and Kim Soohyuk just stood by. Santa-hyun noticed this and asked why the boy was frozen and ordered him to help quickly. It was as if Kim Soohyuk had been doused with cold water, and he didn't understand why he had stalled and started working. The consequences were more severe than expected. so the victim was quickly transferred to an ambulance. The ambulance left the underground parking lot. The firefighters stood and looked at the victim. The rescuers were satisfied with their work and breathed a sigh of relief as the crowd applauded. San Tae-hyun praised all his partners and ordered them to get ready quickly. Kang-shik heard the word rest and was very happy. Kim Soohyuk, who had been keeping behind everyone else, approached the company. He praised Jong Woo-hyun for his good work, as was customary for his partners. But the man just silently turned around, completely ignoring the boy. Kim Soohyuk was devastated because he did not understand why he was being treated this way. The guy stood in a stupor and scratched the back of his head. He could not do anything because he did not know the reasons for this behavior. The only good thing was that everything ended well, without any mishaps or unforeseen situations. Suddenly, Kim Soohyuk realized something. There was no window about the completion of the quest, even though the case was supposedly over and they had rescued the driver of the car. He realized that something was wrong and he couldn't go back. Kim Soohyuk thought there were some additional conditions that he didn't know about. The firefighters were walking back happily because it was easier than they thought. Suddenly, San Tae-hyun stopped everyone and asked where the new guy was. Then the man called Kim Soohyuk. Meanwhile, the guy was looking around, and the man scolded him because he had ordered him to stay close. Kim Soohyuk was worried because the quest was not over, so they had not saved everyone. Suddenly, the window highlighted the word "all survivors," and it suggested Kim Soohyuk. After that, I received a new message about a hydraulic clamp. Kim Soohyuk carefully reread the quest message because it did not mention one victim but several. He analyzed that after the accident, one victim was taken to the ambulance before it arrived, and only the driver was named as a sacrifice for rescue. But even if that was the case, the quest window clearly hinted that there was more than one person to save. Kim Soohyuk then told San Tae-hyun that he thought they should take a closer look at everything, but his partner did not understand this strange behavior. Jong Woo-hyun was angry and mocked Kim Soohyuk. San Tae-hyun said that they had already looked around and found nothing, but the guy was fussing and shining his flashlight into the car to find someone else. Jong Woo told San Tae-hyun to keep Kim Soohyuk because they didn't need a guy who was messing up the team's work. Kang-shik stood up for the new guy. Then Kim Soohyuk interrupted the conversation and yelled at Jong Woo, saying that if there were any other victims in the parking lot, he would be the one to blame. He asked what the man was going to do if a person died because of his inattention. Jong Woo became angry and attacked Kim Soohyuk, telling him not to pretend they were friends and not to call him Hyun. He said that Kim Soohyuk was not so skillful as to act in disregard of sonbae, procedures, and orders. The guy said he didn't ignore anything, he just asked for some time. But he was interrupted by Jong Woo, who was disrupted by San Tae-hyun for his inappropriate behavior and ordered to calm down. The man disobeyed and continued to yell at Kim Soohyuk, saying that he had just transferred and began to act for his own reasons immediately, disrupting the atmosphere in the team. San Tae-hyun listened to this and ordered Kim Soohyuk to get in the car immediately, so it was also an order. The guy kept asking for more time, and the man ordered him again, raising his tone. Kim Soohyuk stood his ground, saying he couldn't leave because there was someone else in the parking lot. Suddenly, he remembered his new opportunity to find life. He was glad he remembered it, but he didn't know how to apply this skill. Jong Woo was just seething. Even though he was being held, he kept muttering to himself. Suddenly, Kim Soohyuk's eyes lit up blue, as if he had switched to some special mode. The guy emitted special rays that searched for the number of survivors. The rays passed over people who were already visible even to the naked eye, and also the civilians who were nearby. Everyone gathered around to see what was happening. Kim Soohyuk did not understand how he did it, but it worked. The guy closed his eyes. He could feel the heartbeat of people nearby. He started counting, and it came to 13 people. He found so many survivors within a 10-meter radius thanks to his new skill. After that, Kim Soohyuk began to quickly count everyone who was around, but there were only 12. Just as he thought. There was one more survivor somewhere. San Tae-hyun shouted at the boy loudly and strongly for not listening to him at all. Kim Soohyuk stood his ground and said that if they didn't act, the person would be in danger, adding that he was sure that someone else was there. San Tae-hyun's face suddenly changed. He was shocked. Kim Soohyuk's face was the same as it was during the fire. San Tae-hyun stalled, and the boy wasted no time in running to find the man. Then the man exhaled loudly. After that, he said that Kim Soohyuk might have been right and ordered to check the area again. Jong Woo was unhappy with this order and that they had listened to the new guy. But San Tae-hyun didn't want to hear anything and ran off to find Kim Soohyuk. Firefighters checked every ventilation pipe, but there was no one there. Suddenly, Kim Soohyuk noticed a cat. He rubbed strangely near the car and scared the boy. Kim Soohyuk went further, searching every corner of the parking lot to find at least a hint of life. Jong-woo followed him and got very angry. The man mentally threatened the boy if they did not find anyone. The firefighters came together after a long search, but no one found anything. Jong-woo was furious and told Kim Soohyuk to explain what kind of a show he was making. But the guy did not fall for provocations and continued to search, saying that there must have been a person nearby. The police then came up to them and said that they had searched near the entrance but found nothing, not even any hints. A tow truck arrived and they asked if they could start cleaning up. Jong-woo shouted at the guy and said that their work was done, but Kim Soohyuk asked him to wait a little longer. Then Santa-hyun intervened and said they were definitely coming back and the job was done. He liked the guy and wanted to believe, but he couldn't let the team down. He ordered everyone out and threatened to talk to Kim Soohyuk. Kang-shik put his hand on the guy's shoulder and wanted to support him, saying that they had already searched everything. A tow truck pulled into the parking lot and said it couldn't join us because the front was too dented. Then he ordered me to grab the trunk and drive the car away. Suddenly, after these words, Kim Soohyuk realized something. He returned from Santa-hyun and headed somewhere. The guy started banging on the trunk. After that, Kim Soohyuk asked if there was anyone inside. He leaned his ear against the car to listen and heard a soft voice calling for his mother. Kim Soohyuk shouted that he had definitely heard something. Even Santa-hyun was shocked. The guy turned around and ordered me to carry a clamp. Jong-woo froze and couldn't believe what had happened. Kang-shik told him to help him. The crowd was also shocked by this development. Kim Soohyuk stuck a mouthpiece in the trunk. Then I made an effort to open it. It was good that his level was rising and he had more strength. Everyone stood behind Kim Soohyuk and waited to see what was inside. Suddenly, the trunk did open. Immediately after that, a strong and foul smell of blood was felt by everyone. Inside was a little girl with her hands and feet tied and wounds, so there was such a stench. Santa-hyun quickly picked up the radio to report the discovery and ask for an ambulance, while everyone stood in a stupor of shock. Jung-woo and Kang-shik also stood there in shock. After that, Santa-hyun ordered the others to carry a first aid kit to give the child first aid. Meanwhile, Kim Soohyuk took the victim out of the car. He took her in his arms and calmed her down while the others were still in shock. Meanwhile, Santa-hyun was handing over the girl's case to the police because the bruises and wounds were not caused by an accident. Firefighters provided assistance and put the girl in a stretcher. Meanwhile, Jong-woo came running. He was shocked and wondered who this Kim Soohyuk was. Meanwhile, the events moved to the fire station. There were employees inside who took calls. An angry firefighter entered the room, muttering to himself. Kang-shik came out of the shower and asked if the man was angry because of the wrong call, but it turned out that it was a false call. He took off his helmet and was indignant that they didn't have enough people to respond to immediate calls and were wasting their energy on other people's jokes. Then the man noticed that the third crew was sitting in their seats and asked what they were doing if the shift had ended long ago. An angry Jong-woo was sitting next to Kim Soo-ok and said that the operation was successful. Then the man asked why they were still sitting there and not going home. Kang-shik said quietly that the driver of the car was a kidnapper and that there was a child in his trunk. The firefighter was shocked by this and asked if the child was okay, but only Kang-shik answered. The others were sadly silent. Then Santa-hyun came in and called Kim Soohyuk. The newcomer was alarmed by the conversation and the tone. The man began to speak for the child he had saved. She was taken to the hospital and examined. It turned out that she was fine as she was transferred from the hospital. There were no serious injuries or traumas. A smile appeared on Kim Soohyuk's face that could not be hidden even if she wanted to. He jumped up and down and felt great relief. Santa-hyun was surprised by this reaction and added that there were some problems with how he found the girl, but he praised her anyway. His partners looked at the happy guy. Some even cheered, but not all of them. Jong-woo sat pouting and looking away. As night fell and Santa-hyun said that everyone had done well and could go home, Kim Soohyuk continued to cheer and hug. Meanwhile, a whole month has passed. Kim Soohyuk was walking down the street shivering. He couldn't understand why it was so cold, and he had promised to buy himself some clothes with his paycheck. He was waiting for some guy who came up behind him. He was a friendly young man with brown hair who asked how long he had been waiting. Kim Soohyuk did not pretend to die while waiting for him. Guo Xing suggested going inside the restaurant. The friends decided to drink to the meeting. They were drinking and eating. A friend noticed that they hadn't seen each other for a long time because everyone was busy with work. Go Seung said that 2 years had passed, and Kim Soohyuk just smiled in response. He just thought that if he counted the time from his previous life, about 5 years had passed. Kim Soohyuk recalled that they were in their 30s and both had their heads in their work. The old friends were having fun, talking, and having a good time together. Go Seung said he saw the video of Kim Soohyuk jumping out of the window like Spider-Man. Kim Soohyuk was embarrassed, and cold sweat ran down his face. My friend was excited to tell me what he experienced when he watched that video and that it became popular on the internet. Go Seung said that Kim Soohyuk was a fireman from God. This made his friend very angry, and he asked if he had been called for this information. But then, Kim Soohyuk's face changed because Go Seung said he was glad that his friend was okay. His gaze dropped down and he asked if Kim Soohyuk had realized how much he had scared his friend. Go Shin asked him to be more careful next time. He added that Kim Soohyuk should remember that people around him care. He suddenly realized that he had forgotten that the survivors were not the only ones who needed to be rescued at the scene. Kim Soohyuk is also a family member, colleague, and friend, so he had to protect them as well. His death brought a lot of grief to his family and left an open wound. From that moment on, he promised to be more careful. His friends were leaving when he was suddenly called out. It was Go Seung who asked him to return carefully. Then Kim Soohyuk said that he had asked his friend to spend the night with him because he was far away. But Go Seung didn't like this idea because Kim Soohyuk lived in one small room, so it was better to take a taxi. The friend insisted and finally asked if Kim Soohyuk was going to get married at work because Christmas was coming and he didn't have a girlfriend. Kim Soohyuk didn't say anything, but it hurt him. Go Shin got into a taxi and said goodbye. Then he called his friend. He abruptly told Guo Xing that he would be bald in the future, so he had better take care of his hair because it was already noticeable, and laughed. Go Sin screamed and was outraged because how could Kim Soohyuk know? But his friend ran away laughing. Meanwhile, the events moved to the street. A new day has come. Kim Soohyuk was running somewhere in a winter jacket, in a great hurry. His mouth was steaming, it was so cold. In 1 week, we made many trips and completed about 10 quests. At some point, the level rose to the 12th, and Kim Soohyuk gained many new and improved skills. His physical abilities also increased dramatically, and equipment weighing more than 40 kilograms was not an obstacle. All of Sonbei's instructions and quest tasks were completed perfectly. There was no longer that immature and stupid Kim Soohyuk. He became different, changed. The guy was running on the same level as the bus, and the passengers noticed and thought he was a professional sprinter. Passers-by also noticed how fast this boy was. Meanwhile, Kim Soohyuk made it to the fire station, or rather ran to it. He walked into the workplace and greeted everyone. Kang Shik greeted him cordially, calling Kim Soohyuk a Maknai monster and asking if he had done it yesterday. The guy was embarrassed and scratched the back of his head. Jung Hyun looked at Kim Soohyuk. They locked eyes. After that, his face became angry and serious and he turned away. Kim Soohyuk noticed that the man was still ignoring him, but he couldn't do anything about it. Kang Shik spoke again, bringing hot tea. He asked what Kim Soohyuk's secret was. The boy tried to pretend that he didn't understand. But Kang Shik told me not to play dumb, because it couldn't be a new guy like that. It was too suspicious. He came closer to Kim Soohyuk and asked her about her superpowers or whether a spider had bitten her. The guy was very nervous, but then a smile appeared on Kang Shik's face. He went about his business and said that it was all just a joke and advised me to get ready for duty. In fact, the guys didn't spend much time together. Kim Soohyuk joined the fire department relatively recently, but Kang Shik Hyun had to leave due to a serious injury. He kept trying to remember the abduction of the girl in the parking lot. No matter how hard he tried, Kim Soohyuk could not remember. He thought that if he did not have this skill, they would not have saved this child. Kim Soohyuk recalled everything that had happened to him in his past life, and many situations awaited him. He mentioned a big forest fire that was about to break out. It was a terrible disaster, and that is how Kang Shik was injured. So Kim Soohyuk decided to save him this time and not let him finish his service. But the guy could not remember a specific time. Meanwhile, San Tae-hyun approached him and noticed that Kim Soohyuk was not cheerful. He asked if the boy ever felt that something bad was about to happen. Kim Soohyuk's face was dripping with cold sweat, but he said that nothing had happened. The boy turned to the window so that San Tae-hyun couldn't see his face, and said that the weather was nice. Kang Shik intervened again and asked what they were talking about. The man joked that San Tae-hyun was also curious about Kim Soohyuk's superpowers. The guy started to get nervous, because if he said it was a forest fire, they would take him for a crazy person. Luckily, the conversation moved on to another topic, which was surprisingly calm during the day. San Tae-hyun and Kang Shik went off to talk somewhere, and Kim Soohyuk tried to remember when the fire happened. The men discussed that there have been a lot of situations lately. San Tae-hyun looked at Kim Soohyuk and realized that without his desperate actions, it would have been completely impossible. Kang Shik laughed that San Tae-hyun had complained that he had been very busy lately because of Kim Soohyuk. The man took the joke and said that the guy was exactly what he needed, and added that there were times when San Tae-hyun felt less experienced. The men looked at Kim Soohyuk, and Kang Shik asked what this guy had been doing before he came to them. San Tae-hyun decided to review Kim Soohyuk's case, but there was nothing surprising. The only special thing about him is that he lost his parents in childhood, so he grew up in an orphanage. San Tae-hyun concluded that Kim Soohyuk was an ordinary guy otherwise, but he did not take his eyes off the boy. And then he asked if Kang Shik thought that Kim Soohyuk was up to something, as if he was preparing for something. Kim Soohyuk was really sitting there looking very serious and tense. Kang Shik held his head and said that things were bad then, because he had already used up his vacation. Suddenly, Kim Soohyuk remembered something from the men's conversation. San Tae-hyun reminded him that Kang Shik's daughter's birthday was coming up. San Tae-hyun said that Kang Shik should go to the birthday party, which was something that could not be missed, but the man said to decide later. Kim Soohyuk stood up abruptly and called Kang Shik. He was very excited and asked when his daughter's birthday was. Kim Soohyuk told him that the fire happened on that day. The men turned around and did not understand what was happening. Kang Shik asked why Kim Soohyuk was suddenly so interested. They began to suspect that he was feeling something. Kim Soohyuk started to mumble something, but realized that he had gotten himself really burned because he had been too harsh. The guy didn't know how else to get out of it and said that he wanted to bring his daughter a present. The men looked at Kim Soohyuk with distrust, but Kang Shik exhaled and smiled. He hugged Kim Soohyuk and told him not to ask such things so seriously, otherwise people might misunderstand. Kang Shik said he was pleasantly surprised by the boy because he had been obedient and not causing trouble lately, and called out to San Tae-hyun to confirm. The man was not expecting this, and cold sweat dripped down his face, but he confirmed that Kim Soohyuk had been doing well lately. Kang Shik took out a photo of his daughter and showed it to the boyfriend, saying that she was cute. Kim Soohyuk was not listening very carefully because he was remembering the fire that coincided with his daughter's birthday. Meanwhile, the events moved to Kim Soohyuk's bedroom. He was sitting on the edge of the bed. The alarm went off at 6 in the morning. The guy rejected him right away. He hadn't slept for a long time because today was the day of the forest fire. Kim Soohyuk came to work at the fire station. There he was met by San Tae-hyun, whose face was surprised. He didn't expect to see Kim Soohyuk come to work so early and already take care of the car. After that, the boy went inside, sat down at a table and drew a map of the forest, studying everything in detail. Meanwhile, others were resting, drinking coffee, and getting ready for the day. No one expected trouble. Time passed, hour after hour, and it seemed like an eternity. Suddenly a siren sounded, and Kim Soohyuk realized it was a fire. Others also heard a siren announcing an emergency. They got together and ran to an immediate call. A message appeared in front of Kim Soohyuk. He had to save as many people as possible, but at least one. Several vehicles were sent out at once, as the fire was already huge. All rescuers and all vehicles left the fire station. They radioed that the fire was on a mountain and was large, so firefighters from that unit would also come to the rescue. San Tae-hyun asked how many people needed to be saved, but the man's answer made his hair stand on end, because as many as 32 people needed salvation so far. San Tae-hyun asked why there were so many people on the small mountain, and Kim Soohyuk interrupted the conversation and said that it was because of the camp that opened in the evening. He gave me a map of Sonbae and told me to look at the paths and the campsite. Kim Soohyuk spoke very confidently, and this aroused suspicion among others, as if he had arranged everything. The guy told me the plan of action, how they would do everything right. San Tae-hyun thought that Kim Soohyuk was acting strangely because he knew about the fire and was preparing for it. The man wanted to think that this was not the case, but he could not. Even from a distance, you could see how bad the fire was on the mountain, and also the number of fire trucks that were gathered near the mountain. All the fire trucks of the district were there. San Tae-hyun took a step and his leg shook. He was shocked by what he saw. The fire was impossibly large and terrible, not to mention the number of people and firefighters who had gathered. Losses were inevitable. It was dark, and only the headlights and beacons of fire trucks were visible, resembling an anthill. The team was in no hurry to run to save them. First, they had to think about everything and collect their thoughts. Kang-shik said he had never seen such a fire. Everyone was standing there with their mouths open and unable to take a step. Santa-hyun noticed Kim Soohyuk picking up the axe and wasting no time. This made him come to his senses, so he ordered the others to gather as well. They had to take everything they needed and get ready. Santa-hyun pointed to a map and gave a lecture. He talked about the campsite and the victims. The situation was difficult, and they had to rescue everyone very quickly. Kim Soohyuk was standing in the back and turned around. He decided to leave the brigade carefully. In his mind, he apologized to Santa-hyun, but he couldn't waste time. Kim Soohyuk ran straight into the forest because he knew that if he didn't, many people would die. The fire was getting stronger and stronger. It was impossible to extinguish it, and everything was covered in smoke. Visibility was getting worse. Kim Soohyuk ran blindly forward because he knew he had to. He wanted to save Kang-shik and the other victims. Kim Soohyuk knew that he alone could do it because he knew the future, even though he was guilty of owing others. But there was nothing more important than life. Meanwhile, the guy was almost on target. The table had a height mark of 150 meters. Kim Soohyuk panicked that the fire had already reached here. He didn't expect things to flare up so quickly. But it was the shortest way to the camp, and any delay endangered people's lives. Suddenly, he doubted whether he could do it. But then he immediately cut himself off from these thoughts. Confidence appeared in his eyes. He turned on the water and went straight into the fire. The wall was high and water should be saved because there was a lot to come. Then, Kim Soohyuk sat down and pushed off the ground. After that, he simply repurposed the place he had extinguished. He landed on the ground and realized that it was his duty. Kim Soohyuk ran on. Suddenly, the skill of sensing danger was activated. Then a huge tree fell in front of him. Kim Soohyuk stopped and screamed. He was scared even with such skills. A tree blocked his path. Meanwhile, the team hadn't gone into the forest yet. Someone called out to Santa-hyun. My partner said that he couldn't find Kim Soohyuk anywhere. He just disappeared somewhere. Santa-hyun and Kang-shik were scared because you could expect anything from this guy. His partner said he hadn't seen the guy since they arrived here. Santa-hyun slapped himself in the face and said that now it was clear why he had been so quiet in recent days. Then Sunbae turned to the 3rd Brigade. He ordered Kang-shik, Hyu-sang, and Jung-woo to go find Kim Soohyuk. Santa-hyun said that the operation will begin only when all the team members are assembled. The man looked at the burning forest and thought what an idiot Kim Soohyuk was. Santa-hyun couldn't believe that the boy had gone there alone. Meanwhile, Kim Soohyuk fell to the ground with the burning tree. He walked away from him, but the shock and fear remained because a little more time and he would have been gone. He thought about what would happen if he didn't have this skill. Suddenly, he realized that as he progressed, he was learning more about the dangers. In any case, it didn't matter how many skills Kim Soohyuk had, because he was only human. The guy ordered himself to open his eyes. After all, one mistake and he will be finished. Kim Soohyuk ran on, when suddenly he felt danger and another tree broke down nearby. He was shocked that it was so dangerous, but he managed to run, even though the feeling of danger was in the way. Kim Soohyuk stopped and surveyed the area. There was only forest and fire in front of him. It was strange because, according to the map, there was supposed to be a camp somewhere in this area, but there was none. He looked around, but because of the fire, it was not clear what was where, because everything was in flames and smoke. Kim Soohyuk had no other choice. He decided to use this skill for once. The guy closed his eyes, and when he opened them, everything was blue again. He looked for life nearby. His abilities went around and around, and then Kim Soohyuk noticed a group of people nearby. It seemed that they were not even alone, but with firefighters. After that, the guy finished his search. He was happy because he had found what he was looking for. Meanwhile, it was snowing on the top of the mountain. The paths were also covered with dust, but it was even easier to see. Firefighters were leading a large number of people. One of the tourists called out for a rescuer. The man asked if they could take a short rest and then continue on. The firemen examined the people. Everyone looked very tired, and time was running out, but it was impossible to go on like this. Then the rescuer agreed and said they could rest for a while. People set up camp, and firefighters looked at maps to understand the situation. The man showed that all the ways they could have gone down were on fire, so the situation was not easy. The firefighters began to decide what to do next and where to go to be safe. The radio and telephones did not work. Another partner said that at this rate, the fire would catch up with them in 3 hours. The man had to make a quick decision, because 3 hours was not enough time and there was no time left. Then he suggested going down to the riverbank. It was certainly not an ideal place, but there was water and gravel everywhere, so they could avoid fire and dehydration. My partner agreed and said it was the best option at the moment. Then the fireman ordered the others to get ready because time was running out and they had to retreat. The man tried to motivate people a bit and cheer them up as much as he could. Then, unexpectedly, Soohyuk arrived and frightened people. The guy looked crazy and said he had finally found them all. The guy saw a message telling him about a pump that could store up to 15 liters of water.